3 months ago, Emma Calloway, 22 years old, daughter of a Navy SEAL captain, was admitted to a long-term neurological care facility after an accident. And since that day, nobody has truly looked at her again. Dr. Sorrento manages her case the way he manages paperwork. Diagnosis confirmed, family notified, prognosis filed away. Nurse Kate Brennan arrived 6 weeks ago. She has no opinions in meetings. She doesn't raise her voice. She keeps her shoulders curved and her eyes low. The carefully rehearsed posture of someone who spent years pretending she doesn't know what she knows. But Kate spent 5 years inside the first SFRD operating in zones where doctors never reach, and she knows something that no civilian neurology manual contains. The spasticity pattern Emma displays is not vegetative. It is desperation. When Captain Calloway lands from a 10-month mission to sign the papers for his daughter's permanent transfer, Kate has exactly one window and one choice: stay invisible or use the hands she swore she would never use again. The technique she uses to reawaken Emma's brain is unlike anything those doctors have ever seen. It shocks every person in that room. And what happens after that will leave you speechless. If this story already has you holding your breath, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Secrets of Silent Badges, where every nurse has a story the world wasn't supposed to know. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Welcome to the channel. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and defeat. Kate Brennan had worked in enough hospitals to know that smell. It wasn't the bleach or the floor wax or the recycled air pushing through vents that hadn't been cleaned since the previous decade. It was something underneath all of that. Something that settled into the walls when hope left a building and didn't come back. Lakeview Neurological Care Center smelled like that on her first day. It still smelled like that 6 weeks later. She pushed the medication cart down the corridor at 6:47 in the morning, moving at the pace she had trained herself to move. Unhurried. Unremarkable. Invisible. Her dirty blonde hair was pulled back into a low, slightly uneven bun. Her scrubs were a half size too large, the sleeves falling past her wrists. She kept her eyes on the cart. She did not scan the hallway the way her body wanted to scan it. Old habit. She killed it the same way she killed it every morning. Room 114 was at the end of the corridor. Kate slowed before she reached it. Not because the chart required extra attention, not because the vitals from the night shift had flagged anything unusual. She slowed because she always slowed at room 114, and she had not yet been able to stop herself from doing it. She stopped at the door. She looked through the narrow glass panel. Emma Calloway was lying exactly as Kate had left her the night before. On her back, head slightly elevated, arms resting at her sides, the left one curled slightly inward at the wrist. The subtle flexion that Dr. Sorrento called residual spasticity and noted in the chart every third day without looking up from his phone. Emma was 22 years old. 3 months ago, she had been a junior at the University of Virginia. Pre-law. Dean's List 2 semesters running. She had a roommate who had been interviewed by the local news after the accident. Crying into a camera, saying Emma was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and stayed late to help strangers carry groceries. That was the Emma Calloway the world knew. The Emma Calloway in room 114 had not opened her eyes in 94 days. Kate pushed open the door. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped in their steady, indifferent rhythm. The feeding tube ran its slow drip. The window blinds were half closed against the early morning light, the way the night aid always left them, and the room had the particular stillness of a place where time had stopped arguing. Kate set down the cart and walked to the bedside. She did not check the monitors first. She never checked the monitors first. She looked at Emma. Really looked at her. The way she had looked at men in the field when the instruments were gone and the only diagnostic tool left was her own eyes and hands and the 6 years of training that lived somewhere beneath her skin. Emma's face was slack, pale, the kind of pale that came from 94 days without sunlight. But her color was not gray, not the gray that Kate had learned to recognize as the color of a body quietly deciding it was done. Emma's skin had a warmth to it, faint but present, something that didn't match the flatness of the chart that hung on the wall. Kate reached for Emma's left hand. She lifted it gently and held it in both of hers. She felt the warmth of it. She felt the tone in the muscles, the subtle resistance that the chart called spasticity, and Kate called something else entirely. She placed 2 fingers against the inside of Emma's wrist and counted. Pulse. Steady. Strong. Stronger than it should be for a body that was supposed to be fading. Kate set Emma's hand back on the mattress. She straightened the blanket. She adjusted the angle of the pillow. Small things. Things that took 30 seconds. Things that nobody would look at twice. But while she did them, she watched Emma's face. And Emma's face, in those 30 seconds, did something that it was not supposed to do. The left corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, not a twitch, a compression. The kind of compression a face made when something registered somewhere behind it. Kate went completely still. She had seen that movement before, 4 times in 6 weeks, always small, always brief. Always at moments when Kate was close, and the room was quiet and the monitors were not alarming, and nobody else was watching. She pulled out her phone and opened the voice memo app. Day 42, she said quietly. 06:52. Left perioral compression. Duration approximately 1.5 seconds. No corresponding monitor alert. Patient's wrist tone elevated above baseline. No nursing note from overnight shift documenting change. She stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Then she heard the footsteps. Dr. Marco Sorrento walked like a man who had decided the floor owed him something. Hard heels, deliberate pace. The kind of stride that was designed to announce itself before the person arrived. Kate heard him coming from the nursing station. She straightened her shoulders, curved them again immediately, and moved back to the medication cart. He pushed the door open without knocking. He was holding a coffee cup and a tablet, and he was reading something on the tablet as he walked in, which meant he had not looked at Emma yet. He was 44 years old and had been the attending physician on the Lakeview Neuro Unit for 11 years. He had kind eyes in photographs. In person, his eyes moved across rooms looking for confirmation that he was the most important thing in them. His gaze landed on Kate. Brennan. He said her name the way people said placeholder words. You're early. Early shift, she said, covering for Daniels. He finally looked at Emma. A 3-second look. The same 3-second look Kate had watched him perform 6 times in the past week. Eyes to face, eyes to monitor, eyes back to tablet. Stable, he said. Same as yesterday. Chart the morning vitals and flag me if the feeding tube triggers again. He turned to leave. Kate's jaw tightened. She said nothing. She watched him walk out the door and listened to his heels carry him back down the corridor. And she stood in the quiet of room 114 and breathed. Old habit. She killed that one too. The morning passed the way mornings passed at Lakeview. Slowly. Medication rounds, vital checks, repositioning patients who could not reposition themselves, charting numbers that didn't change, answering call lights from families who had been told the same thing so many times they had stopped believing any of it. Kate moved through all of it, the way she moved through everything here. Efficiently. Quietly. Without drawing attention to her hands, which had once placed a tourniquet on an artery in a blown vehicle in Kandahar in under 8 seconds. Without drawing attention to her eyes, which catalogued every patient she passed with the same clinical precision she had used to assess casualties on the side of a road that appeared on no official map. She was invisible. She had worked very hard to become invisible. At 10:15, she passed Dr. Sorrento in the break room. He was on the phone, and he was using a voice Kate recognized, the administrative voice, the one that was not for patients or families, but for systems. Budget reviews, transfer approvals. The procedural language of a facility deciding what to do with the bodies it had run out of ideas about. She heard one word before she moved past the doorway. Calloway. She kept walking. At 11:30, the charge nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Patrice, who had been at Lakeview for 16 years and knew every shadow in every corner, stopped Kate at the station. "You hear about the transfer?" Kate kept her expression neutral. "What transfer?" "Calloway, room 114. Sorrento put in the paperwork this morning. Long-term residential placement, out of state." Kate set down the chart she was holding. "How long?" "Paperwork goes to the family for signature tomorrow. She stays here maybe 2 more weeks." Patrice paused and looked at Kate with the sideways attention of someone who notices things that other people pretend not to notice. "You've been spending time in that room." Kate picked the chart back up. "She's on my rotation." Patrice said nothing for a moment. "Her father's coming in," Patrice said finally. "Tonight or tomorrow morning. Captain something. Navy. Been deployed. First time he's seen her since the accident. Sorrento wants the family briefed before the transfer papers go out." Kate nodded. She walked back toward room 114. She did not go inside. She stood at the glass panel and looked. Emma's hand had moved. Kate could see it from the doorway. The left hand, the one with the elevated wrist tone, had shifted on the mattress. Not by much. 2, maybe 3 inches. The fingers were slightly more extended than they had been that morning. Kate pushed the door open. She walked to the bedside. She lifted Emma's left hand. She held it. She leaned close and spoke in a low, even voice. The voice she had used in dark buildings when she needed someone to hear her without panicking. "Emma, my name is Kate. I need you to listen to me." The monitors beeped. The feeding tube dripped. "Emma," she said, "if you can hear me, I need you to squeeze my hand. Just once. Anything you can manage." "Nothing." Kate waited. 15 seconds. 30. Then Emma's fingers moved. Not a spasm. Not the involuntary flexion of muscles that had been held in one position too long. A deliberate, effortful, unmistakable curl of 4 fingers pressing against Kate's palm. Kate did not move. She did not breathe. She counted the pressure. 2 seconds. 3. Then it released. Kate set Emma's hand back on the mattress. She pulled out her phone. Her voice was steady when she spoke into the recorder, but her pulse was not. Day 42, 11:47, directed motor response. Verbal command issued. Patient produced deliberate grip response against my palm, sustained approximately 3 seconds. This is the 5th documented response in 6 weeks. No physician has been present for any of them. She stopped the recording. She stood at Emma Calloway's bedside, and she thought about the transfer papers sitting on Sorrento's desk. She thought about the long-term residential facility somewhere out of state. She thought about a father who had been on deployment for 10 months and was arriving tomorrow to sign his daughter's life into a building she would probably never leave. And she thought about a rule she had given herself the day she walked out of Fort Bragg for the last time. The rule that had kept her safe and quiet and invisible for 3 years. Never again. Never use what you know. Never make yourself visible. Never be the person who knows too much. She looked at Emma. Emma's chest rose and fell, slow, steady, alive. Kate had spent 5 years keeping people alive in places where the rule was that they were already dead. She had learned to read the signals that bodies sent out when they were still fighting. She had learned that the distance between surviving and dying was sometimes nothing more than one person willing to look closely enough to see the difference. She looked at Emma Calloway. Emma was still fighting. Kate closed her eyes. She pressed her fingers together at her sides. She thought about what she was considering. She thought about everything it would cost her. Then she opened her eyes, and she made a decision that the rule was not going to survive. Captain Daniel Calloway arrived at 7:14 the following morning. Kate knew he was there before she saw him. She heard the change in the hallway, the way the nurses at the station straightened without being told, the way Patrice's voice shifted half a register when she answered the front desk call. The way even the air in the corridor seemed to compress slightly. The way it did when someone walked into a room who had spent decades commanding the attention of every space they entered. Kate was at the medication cart outside room 109 when he came through the double doors. He was in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray jacket, a navy duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. He was 47 years old and built like a man who had never once in his life allowed his body to become anything other than a tool. 6'2", 210 pounds of compressed purpose. His hair was short and silver at the temples, and his jaw was set in the particular way of someone who had rehearsed this moment for months and was discovering that rehearsal had not helped at all. He did not look at the nurse's station. He did not ask for directions. He walked straight toward room 114, the way men walked toward things they were afraid of, without hesitation, without slowing down. Kate watched him go. She watched the door to room 114 open and close behind him. She stood at the medication cart with a syringe in her hand that she had stopped filling 3 seconds ago, and she stood there for a long moment before her hands remembered what they were supposed to be doing. At 7:45, Dr. Sorrento arrived. He was wearing a blazer over his usual shirt, which meant he had known about the meeting and dressed for it, which meant this was not a clinical visit, but a performance. He stopped at the nursing station. He said something to Patrice that Kate could not hear. Patrice glanced down the corridor toward room 114. Sorrento straightened his collar and walked toward the room. Kate finished her medication round. She charted every number. She answered 2 call lights. She changed an IV bag in room 107. She did everything she was supposed to do in the order she was supposed to do it. She did not go near room 114. She had made a decision last night. She had turned it over for 6 hours in the dark of her apartment, examining every angle of it, the way she had been trained to examine decisions that could not be undone. She had thought about the transfer papers. She had thought about the 5 grip responses she had documented alone, without a witness, without a physician's signature, without a single piece of institutional support behind her. She had thought about what she was going to do, and she had thought about what it was going to cost. At 8:22, Sorrento came out of room 114 alone. He walked to the nursing station. He set down his tablet. He spoke to Patrice in the low, efficient tone of a man wrapping up administrative details. Kate caught fragments from the far end of the corridor. Transfer protocol, consent forms, 1 week. She heard 1 week and something inside her went quiet in the way that things went quiet right before they became very loud. 1 week. She had thought she had until tomorrow, until the paperwork went out, until the father arrived and the meeting happened and the forms were signed and the timeline became official. 1 week was not tomorrow. 1 week was now. She set down the chart she was holding. She walked toward room 114. She did not let herself slow down. She did not let herself talk herself out of it. She pushed the door open. Captain Calloway was sitting in the chair beside Emma's bed. He was leaning forward, both elbows on his knees, Emma's right hand held in both of his. His head was down. He was not speaking. He was just holding her hand with the quiet intensity of a man who had been holding it in his mind for 10 months and had finally arrived to do it with his body. He looked up when Kate entered. His eyes were red. He had been crying, or had been close to it, and the effort of pulling himself back from that edge had left his jaw tight and his shoulders locked in the rigid posture of a man refusing to collapse in front of a stranger. "Can I help you?" His voice was controlled, polite, the surface layer over something enormous. "I'm Kate Brennan. I'm one of the nurses on your daughter's unit. I'm sorry to interrupt." He nodded. His eyes moved over her the way military eyes moved, quick, cataloging, assessing without appearing to assess. She had seen that look 1,000 times. She had used it herself. He looked back at Emma. "How long have you been her nurse?" he asked. 6 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you know her?" "Before." Kate understood what he was asking. "Did you know her before she was this? Before she was a body in a bed that people walked past?" "No, sir. I came after." He nodded again. His thumb moved slowly across the back of Emma's hand. "They told me she doesn't respond," he said. "That she hasn't shown any response since the first 2 weeks." Kate stood at the foot of the bed. This was the moment. She could feel it the way she had learned to feel moments in the field, the precise second when a situation had reached the point where doing nothing was itself a choice, and not a neutral one. She thought about the rule, never again. Never use what you know. She thought about Emma's fingers pressing against her palm, deliberate, sustained. 3 seconds of a young woman locked inside her own body, reaching for the one thing that meant someone was listening. Kate took a breath. "Captain Calloway," she said, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is not something I should be telling you without Dr. Sorrento present. I'm telling you anyway." He looked at her. His eyes were fully on her now. Not the polite surface attention of a civilian. The complete, locked-in attention of a man who had spent 30 years in situations where what someone said next could determine whether people lived or died. "I'm listening," he said. "In the past 6 weeks, I have documented 5 separate occasions where Emma produced a directed motor response to a verbal command. She gripped my hand, deliberately, each time I asked her to." The room went very still. Calloway's jaw moved. He looked at Emma. He looked back at Kate. "Sorrento told me there was no response. He said the assessments were clear." "The assessments were conducted during peak medication levels," Kate said. "Emma is on baclofen and clonazepam for spasticity management. Both drugs suppress motor response. Every neurological assessment she has received since week 3 has been conducted within the window of peak suppression." Calloway stood up. He was taller standing than he had looked sitting. The full weight of his presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with his size and everything to do with what was behind his eyes. "Are you telling me the assessments were wrong?" It was not a question. It was the beginning of something. "I'm telling you that the conditions under which they were conducted may have prevented accurate results," Kate said carefully. "I'm telling you that the responses I documented are inconsistent with the diagnosis of persistent vegetative state. And I'm telling you that in my experience, and I have relevant experience, what Emma is showing is not a body shutting down. What is it then?" Kate looked at Emma, the pale face, the closed eyes, the slight curl of the left wrist that the chart called spasticity. "It's someone who is still in there," she said, "and running out of time for anyone to notice." Calloway was silent. He looked at his daughter for a long time. The machines beeped. The light through the half-closed blinds fell across Emma's face in narrow strips. "What experience," he said finally. His voice was quiet, careful. The voice of someone who had noticed something and was deciding whether to press it. Kate met his eyes. She thought about 3 years of careful invisibility. 3 years of curved shoulders and blank expressions, and a name on a badge that was hers, but somehow wasn't. She thought about 5 grip responses that nobody else had seen, she said, the kind that matters right now. Calloway looked at her for a long moment. His eyes moved over her face the same way they had when she walked in. Only this time they stopped differently. They stopped on her hands, on her posture, on the precise stillness of someone who had learned to be still, not from boredom or passivity, but from training. Something shifted in his expression. "Who are you?" He was not asking about her name. Kate kept his gaze. "I'm the nurse who has been watching your daughter for 6 weeks while everyone else decided she was already gone." He was quiet. Then he sat back down in the chair beside Emma's bed. He picked up his daughter's hand again. He looked at it for a moment, the way a man looks at something he cannot afford to lose. "What do you need from me?" he said. Kate reached into her scrub pocket. She pulled out her phone. She opened the voice memo file and held it out to him. "I need you to listen to this," she said. "All of it. And then I need you to decide how much time we have before those transfer papers get signed." Calloway took the phone. He pressed play. And in room 114 of the Lakeview Neurological Care Center, a Navy SEAL captain sat beside his daughter and listened to the voice of a woman he had known for 4 minutes document the 5 moments when his daughter had refused to stop fighting. Kate stood at the window. She looked out at the parking lot. At the ordinary gray morning, her hands were perfectly still at her sides. She was not invisible anymore. And the rule she had kept for 3 years was already burning. The voice memos ran for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Calloway listened to all of them without moving. Kate watched him from the window. She watched his face the way she had learned to watch faces in rooms where the information being processed was too large for the person receiving it. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on Emma. But his hands, the hands holding the phone, were absolutely still with the specific stillness of a man exerting enormous control over something that wanted very badly to move. When the last recording ended, he set the phone on the bed rail. He was quiet for a long time. 5 times, he said. Yes. And nobody else has seen this. Nobody else has been looking. He absorbed that. He did not react to it the way civilians reacted, with outrage, with noise, with the instinct to make the feeling heard immediately. He absorbed it the way operators absorbed information that changed the operational picture, quietly, completely. And then he began to move. I want Sorrento in this room, he said. Kate nodded. But before you call him in, I need you to let me try something. He looked at her. The technique I mentioned, she said. It's not in any civilian protocol. It's not published. You won't find it in a manual. But I have used it before, on patients like Emma. Patients who were written off and shouldn't have been. What kind of technique? Median nerve arousal protocol, Kate said. Precise pressure at the wrist. It stimulates the ascending arousal pathway directly, bypasses the cortical suppression caused by the medication. If Emma has residual consciousness, it will produce a visible response. Something Sorrento cannot dismiss as spasticity artifact. Calloway's eyes dropped to Emma's left wrist, the one with the elevated tone, the one the chart called a symptom, and Kate called a signal. Where did you learn this? Kate looked at him steadily. I learned it in a place where waiting for the manual was not an option. The silence between them was brief, but it was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that happened between people who had both spent time in rooms where ordinary rules did not apply. He did not ask again. Show me, he said. Kate moved to Emma's left side. She set the phone to record and placed it on the bedside table. She lifted Emma's left hand. She positioned her thumb at the center of the inner wrist, 2 centimeters proximal to the wrist crease, directly over the median nerve. She applied pressure with precise, calibrated force. Not hard, not soft. The specific pressure of someone who knew exactly what they were pressing on and why. Emma, she said, my name is Kate. Your father is here. He's sitting right next to you. If you can hear his voice, I need you to try to open your eyes. She maintained the pressure. 1, 2, 3, 4, nothing. 5, 6. Calloway leaned forward. Emma. His voice came out rough and low, stripped of every layer of command authority down to something that was just a father. Emma, it's Dad. I'm right here. I came back. I'm right here, sweetheart. 7, 8. Emma's eyelids moved. Not a flutter, not the slow, rolling movement of REM, a deliberate, straining, upward push against closed lids, the movement of someone fighting through weight. Calloway made a sound that he immediately stopped making. Kate held the pressure. Keep talking to her, she said quietly. Emma. He moved to the edge of the chair. His free hand came up and touched Emma's face. Gentle, careful. The way enormous hands learned to be gentle when they were holding something irreplaceable. Emma, I need you to open your eyes. You can do it. I know you can do it. Emma's left eye opened. A sliver. A crack of light breaking through 94 days of darkness. Then it closed. But for 2 full seconds it had been open and directed, the pupil visible, the iris shifting, moving toward the sound of her father's voice. Kate released the pressure. She stopped the recording. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. Calloway sat frozen, his hand still on Emma's face, his eyes wide with something that had no name in any language designed for professional use. "She heard me," he said. It was barely a sound. "She heard you," Kate said. He pressed his forehead against Emma's hand. His shoulders shook once, a single convulsion of something enormous, and then he locked it down with the iron discipline of 30 years and lifted his head. His eyes, when they found Kate, were red but clear with the specific clarity of a man who had just been handed a mission after 10 months of being handed nothing. "Get Sorrento," he said. Kate picked up her phone. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. "Captain Calloway, when Sorrento comes in, he is going to dispute everything I just showed you. He is going to use language designed to make it sound like what you saw was involuntary. He is going to look at your grief and use it as a reason to dismiss what your eyes just told you." Calloway stood. He was fully upright now, and the civilian clothes meant nothing. He stood the way men stood who had spent 3 decades being the last line between a problem and the people behind them. "Let him try," he said. Kate nodded. She walked out and went to find Dr. Sorrento. She found him at the nurse's station, signing off on discharge paperwork for room 106. He did not look up when she approached. "Dr. Sorrento, Captain Calloway is asking for you in room 114. He kept signing. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. "He's asking now," Kate said. Something in her voice made him look up. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. The brief, assessing glance of a man who had long ago categorized her as background, efficient, unremarkable, not worth sustained attention. What happened? Emma Calloway responded to a verbal command in the presence of her father. She opened her eye. Sorrento set down his pen. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. Something that looked like the first flicker of a man who had just felt the ground shift under a structure he thought was solid. "Brennan," he said, "muscle activity in vegetative patients is not—" She opened her eye, directed toward her father's voice. Kate said, "Sustained for 2 seconds. I have it recorded. The silence at the nursing station lasted 4 seconds. Then Sorrento picked up his tablet and walked toward room 114. Kate did not follow immediately. She stood at the station, and she looked down at her own hands resting on the counter. The hands that had been still for 3 years. The hands that had just done something that could not be undone. Patrice appeared beside her. The charge nurse did not say anything at first. She looked down the corridor toward room 114. She looked at Kate. Her expression was the complicated expression of a woman who had seen enough to know what she was looking at. "How long have you known?" Patrice asked. 6 weeks, Kate said. Patrice was quiet for a moment. "He's going to come after you," she said. "Sorrento, when this becomes what it's about to become, he's going to make it about you." "I know." "Then why?" Kate looked toward room 114. "Because she squeezed my hand," she said, "and nobody else was going to do anything about it." Patrice picked up a chart. She straightened it unnecessarily. She set it back down. "I'll be at that station all day," she said, "if you need a witness to anything." Kate looked at her. Patrice did not look back. She was already busy with the paperwork in front of her, already invisible in the practiced way of someone who had chosen where to stand. Kate turned and walked back toward room 114. Inside, she could hear Sorrento's voice. Measured, clinical, explaining. She pushed open the door, and she prepared for the part that came after the technique, the part nobody trained you for, the part where you had to stand in a room and defend what your hands already knew was true. Sorrento was standing at the foot of Emma's bed when Kate walked in. He had his tablet in one hand and his clinical expression in place, the one that was designed to communicate authority without aggression, certainty without arrogance. Kate had watched him use it on families for 6 weeks. It was a good expression, practiced, polished. the expression of a man who had delivered difficult news often enough to have built a reliable system for doing it. Captain Calloway was standing on the opposite side of the bed. He had not sat back down. The distance between the two men was 8 feet and about 30 years of different kinds of experience. And the air between them had the particular charge of a conversation that had already begun badly and was deciding how much worse it intended to get. Kate positioned herself near the door, close enough to be present, far enough not to be dismissed as hovering. Sorrento glanced at her when she entered. 1 second. Then his attention went back to Calloway. "Captain," he said, "I understand how distressing it must be to witness muscle activity in a loved one and interpret it as a response. That reaction is completely natural. Families frequently—" She opened her eye, Calloway said. His voice was even, quiet, the quiet of a pressure vessel. Sorrento nodded with the patience of someone who had been interrupted this way before. "What you observed was consistent with spontaneous eyelid movement, which we see regularly in patients at Emma's stage. The subcortical—" "I watched her eye move toward my voice," Calloway said. "It moved toward the sound of my voice after this nurse applied pressure to Emma's wrist and asked her to open her eyes in response to hearing me. That is not spontaneous. That is directed." Sorrento's expression adjusted slightly. A fractional recalibration. He looked at Kate. "What exactly did you do, Brennan?" Kate kept her voice even. "I applied precise manual pressure to the median nerve at Emma's left wrist. It's a stimulation technique designed to engage the ascending arousal pathway in patients whose cortical responsiveness may be suppressed by medication. That technique is not part of our protocol. I'm aware. It's not part of any protocol I recognize. It's used in specialized field medicine," Kate said. "I have documentation from prior applications." Sorrento set his tablet down on the windowsill. He turned to face her fully, and Kate saw the shift happen. The clinical expression did not disappear. It reorganized. The man behind it had just identified the problem in the room, and the problem was not the patient. "Miss Brennan," he said, "you performed an undocumented procedure on a patient without physician authorization. You contacted the patient's family directly with unsanctioned clinical claims. And now you're presenting unverified personal documentation as grounds to challenge a diagnosis that was reached through multiple assessments conducted by qualified neurologists. The assessments were conducted during peak baclofen and clonazepam levels," Kate said. "That is standard protocol for a patient with severe spasticity. It is not standard protocol for brain death or vegetative state assessment. The American Academy of Neurology guidelines require documentation that sedating medications are below therapeutic threshold before any consciousness determination is considered valid." Sorrento's jaw tightened. There it was. There. Kate had seen it in the supply room equivalent 100 times in 100 different facilities. The moment when the person on the other side of the conversation realized that the person they had categorized as background had just cited a specific guideline with a specific name and a specific requirement. The moment when the background started talking back with precision. Emma's baclofen dose at the time of her last formal assessment, Kate continued, was 30 milligrams per day divided into 3 doses. Her clonazepam was 1 milligram twice daily. The assessment was conducted at 10:30 in the morning, approximately 2.5 hours after her morning doses. Both drugs produce peak plasma concentration between 90 minutes and 3 hours post-dose. She was assessed at maximum suppression. Where are you getting this information? Her medication log, which I am authorized to access as her floor nurse. Calloway had not moved during this exchange. He stood on his side of the bed with Emma's hand in his, and his eyes moving between Kate and Sorrento with the focused attention of a man running targeting calculations. "Doctor," he said, "I want a second opinion." Sorrento turned to him. "Captain, I understand your distress, but a second opinion, based on what a floor nurse performed without authorization. Based on what I watched with my own eyes," Calloway said. "My daughter opened her eye and moved it toward my voice. You can call that spontaneous movement if you want. You can put that language in a chart. But I was in that chair, and I watched it happen, and I am telling you that what I saw was my daughter trying to reach me. And I am not signing any transfer paperwork until a second neurologist independent of this facility examines her under conditions that account for her medication levels. Sorrento was quiet. It was a different quiet than before. Before it had been the quiet of a man managing a situation. Now it was the quiet of a man who was calculating what the situation had just become. "That will take time to arrange," he said finally. "I have time," Calloway said. "Emma has time." What she does not have is another week of the same assessment process that produced the diagnosis we're currently questioning. Sorrento picked up his tablet. He looked at Kate one more time with an expression that was not anger yet, but was building the foundation for it. "I'll need to review the documentation you mentioned," he said. "The prior applications of this technique. Whatever you have. I'll have it on your desk within the hour," Kate said. He left without responding. The door closed. Calloway exhaled. It was the first time Kate had seen him exhale since she walked into the room. He looked at Emma. He looked at Kate. "Who taught you that technique?" he said. It was the second time he had asked. The first time she had deflected. She understood that he was not asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he was a man who read people for a living, and he had been reading her for the past 40 minutes and had arrived at a question he was not going to stop asking. Kate stood at the window. She thought about 3 years of careful nothing. 3 years of low buns and oversized scrubs and a posture engineered to communicate that she was not worth looking at twice. She thought about Emma's eye-opening toward her father's voice. "A man from my unit," she said. "He showed me the technique in a forward operating environment. I watched him use it on a soldier who had been declared unresponsive for 4 days. That soldier walked out of Walter Reed 11 weeks later. Calloway was still." "Which unit?" he said. Kate looked at him. "The one where techniques like that get developed because waiting for them to appear in a manual means people die while you wait." Calloway's eyes moved across her face, her posture, her hands. She watched the calculation happen. He had been in the teams for 30 years. He had worked alongside every tier of special operations. He knew what the posture of trained people looked like when they were trying not to look trained. He knew the difference between a person who stood still because they were calm and a person who stood still because they had been taught how to stand still in rooms where showing tension could get you killed. He had been looking at her since she walked in. He was not looking at a floor nurse anymore. "What's your real background?" he said. Kate held his gaze. The moment had a weight to it that she recognized. The weight of a door that opened in one direction only. "Delta," she said. "First SFOD-D, medical sergeant. 5 years." The room was very quiet. Calloway looked at her for a long time. His expression did not change in any dramatic way. But something behind it settled. The way things settled when a piece of information arrived that made everything that had preceded it make sense. "You've been hiding here," he said. It was not an accusation. "I've been trying to be nobody," Kate said. "I was doing a reasonable job of it until 6 weeks ago. Until Emma. Calloway looked at his daughter. His hand tightened gently around hers. "Does Sorrento know?" "He knows I cited a clinical guideline," Kate said. "He doesn't know why I know it. He thinks I'm a floor nurse who got lucky with a technique she read about somewhere. And when he starts looking into you, he'll find a clean nursing record and a 2-year employment history and nothing before that worth examining," Kate said. "I was careful. Were you?" She thought about that. "I was careful enough for a facility where nobody expected to find anything." She paused. "Whether I was careful enough for what's coming is a different question." "What is coming?" he said. Kate looked at the door. "He's going to come after the technique. He's going to come after my documentation. He's going to argue that what you saw was involuntary, and that I manipulated a grieving father using an unauthorized procedure and unverified anecdotal evidence. He's going to try to make this about my credibility. And if he succeeds, Kate said, the transfer papers get signed, and Emma goes to a facility where nobody will ever apply median nerve stimulation or check her medication timing or notice that she grips back when someone holds her hand. Calloway was quiet. Outside in the corridor, Kate could hear the nursing station. The routine sounds of a floor that did not yet know its morning had just changed into something else entirely. I have people, Calloway said. Resources. If I make calls, I can have an independent neurologist here within 24 hours. Make the calls, Kate said. And Sorrento. Kate looked at Emma. Let him come after me, she said. He's going to find out that the problem with coming after someone who knows how to stay invisible is that they also know every way out of a room. Calloway looked at her with the steady, measuring look of a man who had spent 30 years deciding in seconds whether the person in front of him was going to hold. He decided. Good, he said. Then, let's get to work. The independent neurologist arrived at 9:47 the following morning. Her name was Dr. Vivian Okafor. She was 51 years old, Johns Hopkins trained, and she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 3 decades being the last word in rooms where the last word mattered. She had flown in from Philadelphia. She had a black leather bag and wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular expression of a person who had agreed to this consultation after reading the preliminary file and had arrived with questions that she intended to have answered. Calloway met her at the entrance. Kate watched from the nursing station. Sorrento had arrived 30 minutes earlier. He had not spoken to Kate. He had gone directly to his office, and through the glass panel of the office door, Kate had watched him on the phone for 20 minutes with the focused, deliberate expression of a man assembling a counter-argument. He came out when Okafor walked in. He crossed the lobby with his hand extended and his professional smile engaged. Dr. Okafor. Marco Sorrento, attending neurologist. I'm glad you could come on such short notice. I think once you've reviewed the full case file, you'll find... I've read the case file, Okafor said. She shook his hand briefly. I'd like to begin with the patient. Sorrento's smile held. Of course. I can walk you through the assessment history and explain the clinical rationale for... I'd like to begin with the patient, Okafor said again. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply final. Sorrento walked her toward room 114. Kate fell into step behind them. Sorrento stopped without turning around. Miss Brennan, I don't think your presence is necessary for... Dr. Okafor asked to meet the nursing staff who had direct patient contact, Calloway said from behind Kate. He had been at the station and had moved to join them with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent decades positioning himself exactly where he needed to be. Nurse Brennan has had more direct contact with Emma than any other staff member on this floor. Sorrento's expression did not change. He turned and walked toward the room. Kate followed. Inside room 114, Okafor did what good clinicians did. She stopped performing and started looking. She stood at Emma's bedside for 2 full minutes without speaking, without touching, without consulting her tablet. She looked at Emma's face, her hands, the subtle curl of the left wrist, the color of her skin, the quality of her breathing. Then she turned to Kate. You're the nurse who documented the grip responses. Yes. Walk me through the technique you used. Kate described it, precisely, completely, without apology. The median nerve location, the pressure calibration, the physiological mechanism, the ascending arousal pathway, the specific suppression effect of baclofen and clonazepam at peak plasma levels. She spoke the way she had been trained to speak in briefings, without filler, without hedging, with the compact precision of someone for whom clarity was not a communication preference, but a survival skill. Okafor listened without interrupting. Sorrento stood near the window. His arms were not crossed. He was too practiced for that. But his weight had shifted backward in the subtle way of a man who was holding his ground by holding very still. Where did you learn this protocol? Okafor asked. Field application, Kate said. I have documentation from 6 prior cases. 3 of those patients went on to recover meaningful consciousness. Okafor held out her hand. Kate gave her the folder. 12 pages. The cases Rodriguez had provided the last time, adapted to this situation. No, Kate stopped that thought. This was her documentation, her own. 5 weeks of voice memos transcribed and printed, medication logs with timestamps, the grip response records. Okafor read. She did not read quickly. She read the way people read documents that were going to inform a formal opinion. Carefully, completely. Turning back twice to cross-reference dates. When she finished, she closed the folder. I'd like to perform the examination now, she said. Miss Brennan, I'd like you to assist. Sorrento straightened. Dr. Okafor, given the questions around the protocol this nurse has been applying without authorization, I would recommend. I'm recommending she assist, Okafor said. She looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a woman who had no investment in being liked by him, if the technique produces a response. I want to observe the application in real time. If it doesn't, that's information too. Sorrento said nothing. Calloway moved to the chair beside Emma's bed. He picked up her hand without being asked. Kate moved to Emma's left side. She positioned her thumb at the median nerve point. She looked at Emma's face. 95 days of closed eyes and the thin, determined line of a mouth that kept breathing when everything around it had decided it shouldn't have to anymore. Emma, Kate said, Dr. Okafor is here. She came a long way to see you. Your father is holding your hand. I need you to show her what you showed me. She applied the pressure. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. 4, 5. Calloway leaned in. Emma, I'm right here. Same as yesterday. I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I am not going anywhere. 6, 7. Emma's left hand moved. The fingers on the hand Kate was holding. A slow, deliberate, unmistakable curl against Kate's palm. Kate pressed harder with her thumb. Just slightly. 8. Emma's right hand, the one Calloway was holding, closed around his fingers. Both hands. Simultaneously. Calloway made a sound. 9. Emma's eyelids pushed upward. The left one first, then the right. Both eyes opening, the pupils contracting in the light, the irises shifting, searching, finding Calloway. Her eyes locked onto her father's face and stayed. The monitors spiked, heart rate climbing, blood pressure rising, respiratory rate changing to the pattern of a person who was no longer simply existing, but was actively, urgently present. Emma's mouth moved. No sound came out. The effort was enormous, visible in the tension of her jaw and the working of muscles that had been still for 3 months. But the shape was there. The intention was there. Dad. She did not say it, but she said it. Calloway pressed his forehead to Emma's hand, and his shoulders shook, and he did not stop them. Kate released the pressure. She stepped back. She looked at Okafor. Okafor was standing at the foot of the bed with her pen motionless over her clipboard and her knuckles white against the railing. She was watching Emma with the expression of a clinician who had spent 30 years preparing for the moment when what she believed about medicine was either confirmed or shattered, and was currently experiencing both simultaneously. That, Okafor said quietly, is not spasticity artifact. No, Kate said. It is not. Okafor turned to Sorrento. He was standing at the window. He had not moved. His face was the color of something drained. The professional composure was still technically present, every feature in its arranged position. But behind it, something had gone out. The particular light of certainty. The structural confidence of a man who had decided 4 months ago that this room contained a body and not a person, and had been building his administrative reality on that decision ever since. He was looking at Emma. Emma's eyes had closed again. The effort had exhausted her. Her grip on Calloway's hand had loosened, but her fingers remained curled. Not the involuntary curl of spasticity, the curl of a hand that had chosen to hold on. "Dr. Sorrento," Okafor said. Her voice was even, clinical, the voice of someone choosing precision over judgment, at least for now. "I need to review Emma's complete medication administration record for the past 3 months, specifically the timing of each neurological assessment relative to her daily doses. Can you have that pulled immediately?" It was not a question. Sorrento looked at her. Then he looked at Kate. Kate held his gaze. She did not feel triumph. She had been in enough operations to know that the moment the primary objective was achieved was exactly when secondary threats emerged. Sorrento had lost the clinical argument. That meant he would move to the procedural one, the unauthorized technique, the undocumented protocol. The floor nurse who had circumvented the chain of command and contacted a patient's family without physician approval. He was calculating that right now. She could see it. She had expected it. "I'll have it pulled," he said. His voice was controlled and cold and entirely unlike the voice he had used when he walked in. He left the room. Calloway looked up. His eyes found Kate across Emma's bed. She looked at the folder in Okafor's hands. She looked at Emma's fingers still curled around her father's. She thought about what was coming. Sorrento was going to move fast. He was going to pull her employment file. He was going to contact HR. He was going to build the case that everything that had happened in this room was the result of a rogue nurse operating outside her scope. And he was going to use the lack of documentation for the median nerve protocol as the foundation. He was also going to start asking questions about her background. And the answers were not going to match the floor nurse she had spent 3 years pretending to be. "Dr. Okafor," Kate said. Okafor looked up from her clipboard. "Whatever Sorrento files against me in the next 24 hours, I need you to understand that the responses you just witnessed are consistent with every documented case I have from prior applications. Emma is not in a persistent vegetative state. She is in a state of covert consciousness masked by medication suppression. The moment the baclofen is tapered and the assessment is repeated under proper conditions, you will have all the data you need." Okafor studied her, the kind of study that was not about credentials or titles or job descriptions. "How many times have you done this?" she said. "Enough," Kate said. Okafor nodded once. It was the nod of a woman who had made a decision. Then she turned back to Emma, and Kate walked out of the room to find out exactly how fast Sorrento intended to move. She found out immediately. Patrice was at the nursing station with an expression that said the answer was very fast. "He called administration," Patrice said quietly. 10 minutes ago. There's a meeting, 2 o'clock. You, Sorrento, the facility director, and HR. They're calling it a clinical conduct review." Kate stopped at the counter. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had just produced a response in a patient who had been written off for 95 days. The same hands she had spent 3 years trying to make invisible. She looked up at Patrice. Who else knows about the 2 o'clock? Patrice held her gaze. "Captain Calloway does now." Kate exhaled. "Good," she said. And she started preparing for the second battle of the morning. The 2 o'clock meeting started without Kate. Not because she was late. Because at 1:47, Captain Daniel Calloway walked into the facility director's office ahead of schedule, and the meeting that had been designed to dismantle Kate Brennan became something else entirely before she ever sat down. Kate was in the hallway outside the administrative wing when Patrice found her. "Calloway's in there," Patrice said. "Has been for 12 minutes. I don't know what he's saying, but Fernandez came out twice to get water, and both times he looked like a man who had just been informed that his building was on fire." Kate looked at the closed office door. She had not asked Calloway to do this. She had not asked him to fight this battle. She had spent the morning preparing to fight it herself, the way she had always fought things. Alone, quietly, with documentation and precision, and the trained capacity to stay calm in rooms designed to make people feel small. But Calloway had not waited to be asked. The door opened at 1:58. Sorrento came out first. His face was composed in the way that faces were composed when composure was the only thing left. Behind him came the facility director, Robert Fernandez, a compact man in his 50s who managed Lakeview with the administrative efficiency of someone who had learned that the path of least institutional resistance was usually the correct one. Behind Fernandez came Calloway. He looked at Kate. He gave her one nod, small, precise, the nod of a man confirming that a position had been secured. "Miss Brennan," Fernandez said, "please come in." The office was small and overlit. HR Director Janet Ruiz was already seated. She had a legal pad and the expression of someone who had revised her notes twice in the past hour. Kate sat down. Sorrento remained standing near the window. Fernandez sat behind his desk and folded his hands and looked at Kate with the exhausted expression of a man navigating between two forces that were both considerably larger than him. "Miss Brennan," he began, "this meeting was called to address concerns raised by Dr. Sorrento regarding your conduct in relation to patient Emma Calloway. However," he paused, "in light of Dr. Okafor's preliminary findings this morning, and in light of information brought to my attention by Captain Calloway, the scope of this meeting has been expanded." Sorrento's head turned toward Fernandez. "Robert." Fernandez did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Kate. "Dr. Okafor has submitted an initial clinical opinion stating that Emma Calloway's current diagnosis of persistent vegetative state cannot be considered valid, given the conditions under which her neurological assessments were conducted. Specifically, the failure to document medication clearance prior to each assessment represents a deviation from the American Academy of Neurology guidelines." Kate said nothing. "Furthermore," Fernandez continued, "Dr. Okafor has observed and documented 2 directed motor responses and 1 apparent purposeful eye movement in the patient during this morning's examination. She is recommending an immediate medication taper and a full reassessment to be conducted within 72 hours under her direct supervision." The room was quiet. Then Sorrento spoke. "What Miss Brennan did," he said, "is irrelevant to what Okafor observed. The technique she used is undocumented and unauthorized. The way she accessed this patient, the way she contacted the family, the way she has operated on this floor for 6 weeks represents a systematic disregard for—" "The patient responded," Calloway said. He said it quietly. He said it from the chair to Kate's left, where he had positioned himself without ceremony and without invitation, with the simple assumption of a man who had decided he was part of this conversation. He said it, and the room absorbed it, and everything Sorrento had been building collapsed against those 3 words, the way structures collapsed against facts. "My daughter opened her eyes," Calloway continued. "She gripped my hand. She tried to speak. Whatever procedural argument you want to build around the nurse who made that happen, you are going to have to build it in a world where my daughter is alive and responding. And I would think very carefully, Doctor, about how much institutional energy you want to spend attacking the person responsible for that." Sorrento looked at Calloway. For a long moment he looked at him, and Kate watched it happen. The thing she had watched happen once before in a different room, in a different context, with a different set of stakes. The precise moment when a man who had built his authority on the assumption that he was the most powerful person in the room discovered he was not. Sorrento looked at his tablet. He set it on the windowsill. He looked at Emma's door through the office window, the corridor visible in the distance, the door to 114 closed and ordinary from the outside. Kate watched his face. She had expected anger. She had expected another layer of defensive precision, another reconfiguration of the argument. She had prepared for all of that. What she had not prepared for was what actually happened. Sorrento sat down. He sat down in the chair nearest the window, and he put both hands on his knees, and he looked at the floor. And the composure didn't crack, not exactly, but it became transparent, like glass that was still intact, but had stopped concealing what was behind it. "When I assessed her," he said. His voice was different. The administrative layer was gone. What was left was something much older and much less protected. "I believed the data. I looked at the scans, the EEG, the apnea results. I had 3 independent assessments that aligned. I had no reason to question the diagnosis." Kate said nothing. You had 5 grip responses, Calloway said, documented by a nurse on your own floor, submitted to your attention. Sorrento was quiet. I dismissed them, he said. I categorized them as artifact, and I moved forward with the transfer protocol because I had a diagnosis I trusted and a bed I needed and a family I had already briefed. He looked up. He looked at Kate. And Kate looked back at him, and she found that she did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had carried 6 weeks of suppressed frustration into this room. 6 weeks of being invisible and dismissed and categorized as background by a man who had the power to make decisions about a life that was still being lived behind closed eyes. But the man in the chair was not the same as the composure he had worn over him. The composure had been protecting something that turned out to be ordinary. Not malice, not corruption, something worse in its way, and more common. A man who had stopped looking, a man who had let certainty replace attention. I have a daughter, Sorrento said. She's 19. The room was very still. He did not say anything else. He didn't need to. Kate thought about room 114, about Emma's file and the parade of identical chart entries, and the feeding tube, and the half-closed blinds, and the monitors beeping their indifferent rhythm into a room where everybody had quietly agreed that the person inside it was already somewhere else. She thought about the first time Emma's fingers had pressed against her palm. The deliberate, effortful, unmistakable pressure of someone who had been screaming in a language that nobody was reading. Dr. Sorrento, Kate said. He looked at her. The taper needs to start today, she said. Every hour she stays at full dose is an hour the reassessment gets harder to read clearly. Okafor needs clean data inside 72 hours, and we need Emma's system as clear as safely possible before then. Sorrento looked at Fernandez. Fernandez looked at Ruiz. Ruiz looked at her legal pad, and then she set down her pen. I'll draft the revised medication order, Sorrento said. Kate stood. She walked out of the office without waiting to be dismissed. She walked down the corridor, past the nursing station, where Patrice watched her with eyes that asked a question and received an answer without either of them speaking. Past room 109 and room 111 and room 113. She pushed open the door to room 114. Emma was lying exactly as she always was, on her back, head elevated, arms at her sides. But the room felt different than it had every other morning Kate had walked into it, the way a room felt different when it had been witnessed, when someone had finally stood in it and seen what was actually there. Kate walked to the bedside. She stood for a moment without speaking. Then she leaned down close to Emma's ear. We bought you some time, she said quietly. Okafor is going to come back tomorrow and the day after. Your medication is being adjusted. In a few days, when it starts to clear, everything is going to feel less heavy, less like a door you can't open. She paused. Your father is not leaving. I want you to know that. He is not signing anything and he is not going anywhere. You just have to keep doing what you've been doing. She straightened. She looked at Emma's left hand. She placed her own hand over it. Not a clinical hold. Not a nurse checking tone or temperature. Just a hand over another hand. After a moment, Emma's fingers moved. Slow, weak, but deliberate. They curled around Kate's fingers and held. Kate closed her eyes. She stood there in the quiet of room 114 with her hand in Emma Calloway's hand, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what those fingers meant. Not just the clinical weight of a directed motor response confirming conscious awareness, the human weight of it. The weight of a 22-year-old woman who had spent 95 days in the dark, holding on to something she could not name and refusing to let go. Kate had spent 3 years making herself invisible. She had spent 3 years telling herself that the skills she carried were a liability, that the safest version of her life was the one where nobody ever knew what her hands had been trained to do. But Emma's fingers were around hers, and Kate understood something she had been avoiding since the first day she had slowed down outside room 114. The skills she carried had not been given to her for the missions she had already run. They had been given to her for this, for the rooms that didn't look like combat zones, for the battles that didn't announce themselves, for the patients who were fighting with everything they had in complete silence while the world outside made plans for their absence. She gently released Emma's hand. She set it back on the mattress. She straightened her back, her shoulders. The posture she had been suppressing for 3 years rose naturally and without effort into the posture of someone who did not need to pretend to be less than she was. At the door, she almost walked into Calloway. He was standing just outside. He had given her the room. He had waited. He looked at her posture, at the expression on her face that was nothing like the expression of the woman who had pushed the medication cart down this corridor 6 weeks ago. "She's holding," Kate said. He nodded. He looked past her into the room at his daughter. "What happens now?" he said. "For you." Kate thought about that. She thought about the clean nursing record and the 2-year employment history and the carefully constructed invisibility she had built, and then spent one morning dismantling for a 22-year-old woman who had squeezed her hand. "I think," Kate said, "that it might be time to stop hiding what I know." Calloway looked at her. "There's a program," he said. "Joint DoD and VA. Medical officers working in civilian neurological care, bridging the gap between field medicine and long-term care for veterans and their families. They've been looking for someone with the right background to help design the assessment protocols." Kate was quiet. "They'd be lucky to have you," he said. "And I know the right people to make the call." Kate looked down the corridor, at the ordinary hallway of an ordinary facility that had turned out to be the place where she finally stopped running from herself. She looked back at Calloway. "Make the call," she said. 2 weeks later, Emma Calloway opened both eyes on her own. Her first clear word was Dad. Her second was thanks. The chair beside her bed was empty when she said the second one. But the woman who had held her hand in the dark, who had listened when no one else would listen, who had used everything she had ever been trained to do in service of a girl she had never met, that woman heard about it. And for the first time in 3 years, Kate Brennan did not try to be invisible when she smiled. The end. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of that fight, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Secrets of Silent Badges, and never miss a story. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far Emma's story has traveled. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, share it. Welcome to the channel.